My dad acts strict, but he's weak. Make enough noise and he always gives in. My son was standing behind the open door of my equipment warehouse, less than 20 feet from where I was checking a delivery manifest. The forklifts had gone quiet for the day. A flatbed sat in the loading bay with 12 hydraulic pumps chained to its deck, and I was comparing their serial numbers with the sheet in my hand. Caleb must have assumed I had gone back upstairs. His friend Derek Shaw gave a low laugh. Even for a personal guarantee, especially for a personal guarantee, Caleb said. Put him in a room with the family, the bank people, and the board. He'll sign before he lets me make a scene. Derek asked if I might cancel the meeting. Dad only says no until the room gets uncomfortable. I kept my eyes on the manifest. There were two facts I did not understand. The first was why Caleb needed a personal guarantee large enough to involve a bank closing. The second was why he believed family members and company officers needed to watch me sign it. What I did understand was how he had reached his conclusion about me. I had taught him that lesson myself. Once, I covered $72,000 of payroll after he expanded a sales team without approval. Another time, I let him use 2 company trucks for a private project after he threatened to keep my grandchildren away from me. Each time, I called it protecting the family. Caleb called it proof that enough pressure could turn my boundary into a negotiation. On the wall beside the receiving desk hung the compass I had carried during my final military deployment. My commanding officer had engraved 4 words into the back. Hold your line calmly. For years, I had treated calm as the part that mattered most. Listening to my son explain me to a commercial finance broker, I realized I had neglected the rest of the order. Caleb believed calm meant retreat. I signed the manifest, handed it to the receiving supervisor, and left without telling either man I had heard them. That was not fear. It was the first useful decision I had made about my son in a long time. I was 71, and Ward Equipment Supply had existed for 27 years. I started it with 3 used forklifts, 1 service truck, and enough military logistics experience to know that machinery rarely fails at a convenient time. By the year, Caleb asked for my guarantee. The company employed just over 60 people and had been valued at roughly $6.2 million. That number sounded impressive at dinner. On Monday morning, it looked like 60 paychecks, insurance premiums, repair parts, and customers who needed replacement machines before their concrete hardened. I had never considered the company a family trophy. It was a system people depended on. That view came from my years as an Army logistics officer. In the field, a delayed part did not stay a line on a manifest. It became a vehicle that could not move, a unit that could not resupply, or a decision someone else had to make without the equipment promised to them. I built Ward Equipment around the same principle. Problems were reported early. Authority was defined. No one moved risk onto people who had not agreed to carry it. At home, my rules were simpler. I did not argue in front of children. I did not humiliate relatives in public. I did not use anger to win. I believed a person with authority had to control himself before trying to control a room. Caleb had grown up watching those rules. Somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing them as discipline and began seeing them as limits he could exploit. Caleb understood the glamorous side of that system. At 43, he was our director of business development and one of the best salesmen I had ever seen. He remembered a client's production schedule after one conversation and could make skeptical contractors believe an ambitious deal had been their own idea. Several of our largest accounts had come through him. He had earned some of my faith. Years earlier, when a municipal customer dismissed us as too small, Caleb spent 3 weeks learning its maintenance cycle and returned with a replacement plan none of our larger competitors had bothered to build. That contract kept 12 people working through a slow winter. I knew what he was capable of when patience and preparation worked together. That made it harder to admit what he had become, when preparation was replaced by pressure. That ability was one reason I had excused too much. The next morning, Caleb entered my office carrying a Navy presentation folder. He closed the door gently and placed it between us. He did not raise his voice. Caleb never started with volume. He started with charm, urgency, and a version of events in which helping him was the only responsible choice. We have an opportunity to expand our distribution capacity without draining operating cash, he said. Inside the folder was a polished summary for a $1.2 million commercial loan. Ward Equipment's name appeared throughout the first page beside photographs of loading docks and projections of regional growth. The borrower's name appeared only once near the bottom of the second page. Northridge Logistics. What is Northridge? I asked. The property entity holding the warehouse leases, a clean structure for the expansion. Does Ward Equipment own it? It supports Ward Equipment. That was not an answer, and Caleb knew it. I turned to the proposed terms. The loan required my personal guarantee, a pledge tied to my ownership interest in Ward Equipment, and additional collateral documents that were not included. If the deal failed badly enough, it could threaten my home, my retirement security, the company's cash flow, and every payroll obligation behind it. I thought of the mechanics who had just finished unloading those hydraulic pumps, the dispatcher caring for her elderly mother, and the warehouse supervisor with twins starting college. None of them knew Northridge existed. Caleb was asking me to place their stability behind it anyway. Why does a warehouse expansion need my personal guarantee? The lender wants founder support. It's standard at this level. Then why am I seeing it 4 days before closing? His jaw tightened for less than a second. The rate expires Friday. Derek negotiated for weeks, but he did not want to distract you until the terms were ready. He made my exclusion sound like a courtesy. Who authorized Derek to negotiate for Ward Equipment? I did, as Director of Business Development. You can explore opportunities. You cannot pledge the company. Nobody has pledged anything yet. That is why we need your signature. The word need landed harder than the others. I closed the folder. I'll consider it when I have full financial statements for Northridge, a complete debt schedule, ownership documents, a use of funds report, and a list of every asset offered as collateral. Derek already prepared a lender summary. I did not ask for a summary. If we reopen every item, we could lose the rate. Then the rate will have to survive questions. Deadlines had governed most of my working life, but urgency had never excused missing information. When someone claimed there was no time to inspect a load, verify a route, or identify the true owner of an asset, the missing time was often the first sign of the real problem. Caleb studied my face, looking for the moment resistance would become apology. This time he smiled. Fine. Once you see the numbers, I think you'll be comfortable. At the door, he paused. Rachel and Olivia are coming Friday. I invited 2 board members and several managers too. It will be good for everyone to see the family moving forward together. There it was. Caleb was not preparing a meeting. He was preparing an audience. Send the records, I said. He left believing I had begun to surrender. An hour later, I carried the term sheet to Maya Sullivan's office. Maya had been our chief financial officer for 18 years. Her desk was never clean, but she could locate a 7-year-old freight invoice faster than most people could find a current bank statement. She read the first page twice. When did we approve a new distribution center? We didn't. When did we Northridge Logistics? That is what I want to know. Maya pointed to a paragraph describing projected rental income. Ward Equipment rents machinery. We do not collect warehouse rent. I told her what I had heard in the warehouse. She did not react to the insult. She reacted to the guarantee. $1.2 million against a business we did not authorize, she said. How much documentation did he give you? A summary and a deadline. That is not documentation. Caleb uploaded the remaining files that afternoon. The package was large enough to look transparent, but the important relationships were scattered across separate exhibits. Maya ignored the projections and opened the ownership folder first. The final schedule was a single page near the back. Northridge Logistics was not a subsidiary of Ward Equipment. It was not a joint venture approved by our board. Ward Equipment owned no part of it. Caleb did. He had formed it 18 months earlier and held the controlling interest through a private company bearing his initials. The loan package expected Ward Equipment and me to carry the risk while Caleb kept the ownership. Maya studied the 2 warehouse properties listed beneath his name. "Henry, this is not an expansion proposal," she said. "This is a rescue." Through the glass wall, I saw Caleb crossing the floor below. When he looked up, he tapped an imaginary pen against his palm and smiled. Caleb wanted me to believe the loan would expand the company I had built. The ownership records showed it would rescue the company he had hidden from me. "How much?" I asked. Maya pulled the Northridge ownership schedule onto one screen and Ward Equipment's general ledger onto another. "I don't know yet," she said. "But if Caleb needs $1.2 million to rescue this company, I want to know whether he has already used ours." Until then, I had been looking at a loan I could refuse. A hidden transfer would mean the boundary had already been crossed. Maya searched the names and addresses connected to Northridge. The first match was a payment described as a temporary equipment advance. The contractor had never worked at a Ward Equipment location, but the invoice carried the address of one of Caleb's warehouses. Then she found the pattern. Over 11 months, Caleb had divided payments across his approval limit and labeled them as deposits, site preparation, logistics support, or customer development costs. Each invoice looked ordinary by itself. Together, they showed $214,000 leaving Ward Equipment for Northridge contractors, utilities, consultants, and lenders. There was no service agreement, no repayment schedule, no board approval. Payroll was due Thursday morning. The amount Caleb had moved would not empty our accounts by itself, but the proposed guarantee could tie a private failure to the cash that paid 60 employees. Maya did not dramatize that risk. She simply looked through her glass wall at the parts department below. "If Northridge reaches our operating line, people who never approved this will discover it when their paychecks do not clear," she said. "He certified every payment as a Ward Equipment expense," Maya said. No one person in accounting saw the complete pattern. That was how a capable man had used a system designed to trust him. "Preserve every record," I said. "Do not confront him yet. We need Thomas." Thomas Reed had represented Ward Equipment for 19 years. He was 64, careful with words, and almost impossible to hurry. When he arrived, Maya gave him the ownership documents and the transfer summary. He read in silence while Caleb left 2 messages on my phone. The first asked whether I liked the expansion numbers. The second was shorter. "Dad, Friday depends on everyone staying on schedule. Call me." Thomas placed the transfer report over the loan package. A family argument becomes a corporate crisis when someone places employee payroll behind his personal debt, he said. He separated what we knew from what still required review. Northridge belonged to Caleb. Ward Equipment owned none of it. Caleb had never disclosed that conflict to the board, and his business development authority did not permit him to fund a private company with corporate money. Thomas advised Maya to require a second approval for any unusual transfer initiated by Caleb. He prepared notices preserving the company's position with our bank and insurer. But he warned me not to assume the risk was gone until the lender confirmed what documents it had received. The distinction was important. We could stop new transfers inside Ward Equipment immediately. We could not yet know whether Derek had sent the lender an incomplete resolution, a draft pledge, or another document Caleb believed carried authority. Thomas would not promise safety until the bank checked its own file. "Can Caleb still work?" I asked. "He can manage clients," Thomas said. "He cannot commit new money or assets while the board reviews this. Then protect the company without turning the office into a public trial." Maya began the control changes. Thomas contacted the bank through its legal channel. I did not yet know whether every account, guarantee, or proposed lien was secure. What I knew was that Caleb still expected me to sign on Friday. The complete Northridge debt schedule reached us the next morning. The company owed approximately $780,000 across a short-term property loan, contractor balances, equipment leases, and overdue operating bills. One warehouse had stable tenants. The other was mostly empty. The proposed $1.2 million loan was not designed to build a Ward equipment distribution center. $690,000 would repay existing Northridge debt. Another portion would repay early investors and transaction costs. What remained would keep the company operating for a while longer. Maya compared Caleb's optimistic letters of intent with the leases already signed. Even under favorable assumptions, Northridge could run short of cash again within 9 to 12 months. "This loan does not expand Ward equipment," she said. "It makes Ward equipment responsible for a company it does not own." Caleb was asking me to place my home, my retirement security, and 60 livelihoods behind a business that had no reliable path to break even. The empty warehouse appeared several times in Caleb's presentation beneath bright projections of future demand. In the rent roll, it was a different picture. Large sections without paying tenants, incentives offered to prospects, and maintenance costs continuing whether anyone occupied the space or not. The loan would erase yesterday's emergency without changing the conditions that created tomorrow's. For years, I had assumed Caleb would eventually lead Ward equipment. I never promised him ownership, but I gave him important clients, brought him into planning meetings, and let employees see him as the likely next generation. His talent made that future seem natural. The Northridge records changed the question. I was no longer deciding whether my son deserved one more rescue. I was deciding whether a man who concealed ownership, moved company money, and treated a guarantee as something to extract under pressure could ever be trusted with unilateral control. That realization hurt more than the numbers. A failed warehouse could be sold. A succession plan built around the wrong person could damage the company long after I was gone. I called Derek. "Which company receives the money?" I asked. "Northridge receives the initial funding, then deploys it through the warehouse program." "Who owns Northridge?" There was a pause. "The ownership schedule is in the package. Caleb can walk you through it Friday." "I asked you." Derek lowered his voice. "I do not want to misstate a technical detail without the documents in front of me." A broker arranging a 7-figure loan knew who owned the borrower. His refusal was an answer. Maya found his compensation agreement in the lender file. His fee depended on the loan being funded. Attached to it were Northridge's rent rolls, debt payoff letter, and overdue contractor report. Derek knew the ownership. He knew the debt. He knew most of the money would repair old losses. He had still presented the loan to me as regional expansion for Ward equipment. That evening, Rachel came to my house carrying a covered dish. She placed it in my refrigerator and sat across from me at the kitchen table. "Caleb thinks you are preparing to humiliate him," she said. "Asking where $1.2 million goes is not humiliation. He has worked for your approval his whole life. Then why is Olivia attending?" Rachel folded her hands. "She needs to see that her father has a future in the company. She is 17. She does not need to watch him ask me to risk my home. If you force Caleb into a corner, he may say things he regrets. You know how he gets when he feels ignored." There was no surprise in her voice. She spoke as if his anger were a scheduled part of the meeting, something I should prevent by agreeing in advance. "And if he raises his voice?" I asked. Please do not make the children think you are choosing strange strangers at the company over their father. The covered dish had been a gesture. That sentence was the reason she came. The people at Ward Equipment are not strangers, I said, and Olivia will not be asked to choose between us. Rachel stood. Sometimes keeping a family together requires one person to bend. It has always been the same person. She did not argue. I watched her drive away and understood that Rachel had accepted Caleb's anger as a normal instrument of family decision-making. She did not need to create North Ridge to share responsibility for what came next. She only needed to believe that my fear of losing the children was a legitimate way to close the deal. After her car left, I went to the small study at the back of my house. The compass from the warehouse wall lay on my desk. I turned it over and read the engraving, "Hold your line calmly." The needle settled north without hurry. There is a difference between peace and delay. Peace resolves something. Delay merely sends the cost forward. Every time I had paid to end one of Caleb's crises, I had sent the cost toward this meeting. The next afternoon, Caleb entered my office without knocking. Why does Maya have to approve my vendor payments? The company is reviewing cash controls before Friday. Derek says Thomas contacted the bank. A personal guarantee involving company assets reached counsel. His voice rose. You are treating a normal financing structure like I did something behind your back. I let the sentence remain where he had placed it. Caleb lowered his voice again. Olivia and the board will be there Friday. Think about what it says if you embarrass me in front of them. Then do not make the meeting their burden. He left without mentioning North Ridge's ownership or the $214,000. I asked Thomas what it would take to keep Ward Equipment from becoming Caleb's next rescue after I was gone. He said the answer would require months, not a document signed overnight. Independent oversight, a formal valuation, and a structure in which employees rather than one heir eventually held control. Prepare the options, I said, and protect separate education funds for the grandchildren. They should not lose their future because their father loses authority. Thomas warned me that changing succession could not be done as punishment in the middle of a family dispute. It would require independent valuation, tax review, formal trust documents, and board oversight. Then begin it correctly, I said. I am not trying to win Friday. I am trying to make sure no future Friday can place this company behind one person's private debt. The following morning, he sent a formal invitation titled Family Business Expansion Closing. Rachel, Olivia, Derek, 2 board members, several managers, and the bank's senior credit officer were listed as guests. He had built the room exactly as he described it in the warehouse. I accepted the invitation. Before I faced Caleb in front of the audience he had chosen, I needed one final answer from the bank. Had my son merely prepared documents for me to sign, or had he already found a way to place something beyond my reach? Thomas called me early Friday morning. The bank has completed its authority check, he said. No guarantee has been accepted. No lien exists on your home or your shares. Ward Equipment's operating accounts and payroll are protected. I looked through the glass wall of my office. Below me, the service department was preparing machines for Monday deliveries. For 3 days, I had not known whether Caleb had already pushed some commitment farther than we could see. Now I knew he had documents, a deadline, and an audience, but he did not have my assets. The danger had been contained before the confrontation began. That knowledge did not remove the stakes. It changed them. I no longer had to gamble with the company in order to expose the truth, but I still had to correct a false expansion story in front of the managers and directors Caleb had invited. If I stayed silent, the loan might stop. Yet the people responsible for Ward Equipment's future would continue believing North Ridge belonged to us. Caleb did not know that. He had arrived early and turned our conference room into a rehearsal for the future he wanted everyone to believe was already approved. A slide showed 2 warehouse buildings beneath the Ward equipment name. Presentation folders sat at every seat. A silver pen lay beside the chair reserved for me. Caleb was speaking to 3 managers when I entered. "Once Henry signs today, Northridge gives us the regional footprint we've been missing," he said. "Clients will see one integrated operation." He did not mention that Ward Equipment owned none of Northridge, or that most of the loan would repay old debt. When he saw me, he smiled. "Derek says the bank is ready. All they need is your signature and the corporate resolution. Then the bank can tell us that. Today needs to feel positive. The managers should not leave thinking the family is divided. The managers should leave knowing whether their company is secure." The room went quiet. I returned the silver pen to the supply tray. "You are still coming?" Caleb asked. I accepted the invitation. Relief crossed his face. He mistook attendance for consent because in the past, getting me into the room had been most of the work. One manager glanced at the warehouse slide and asked whether the expansion would change staffing at our current location. "No expansion has been approved," I said. Caleb answered before the manager could react. "That is a formality. We will settle it at the bank." He said it with enough certainty that I understood the purpose of the rehearsal. By the time we reached the bank, he wanted everyone emotionally committed to a future that existed only if I surrendered. I joined Maya and Thomas in her office for an emergency call with the independent directors. Maya presented Northridge's ownership and the $214,000 in undisclosed transfers. Thomas explained that Caleb had never received authority to pledge Ward Equipment. I did not ask the board to fire my son. I asked it to protect the company while he had an opportunity to respond. The directors approved the dual control measures, suspended Caleb's authority to move money or commit assets, and authorized a formal investigation. They also approved the first step toward an employee ownership trust, subject to valuation, tax review, and completed legal documents. My grandchildren's education funds would be separated from any future business interest Caleb might receive. His employment status would not be decided until he answered the evidence. Department heads would receive only a neutral notice about updated financial controls. Protecting the company did not require turning 60 employees into spectators at a family trial. One director asked why I did not cancel the bank meeting and confront Caleb privately. "Because he has already told managers and the lender that Northridge is our approved expansion," I said. "That corporate statement must be corrected in front of the people expected to rely on it. The family evidence can remain private." I also instructed Thomas to preserve a path back for Caleb if the investigation confirmed the current facts. Repayment counseling, complete disclosure, and independent supervision could create another opportunity someday. They would not restore automatic control. I was changing the succession plan, not declaring that my son was incapable of change. Ward Equipment would not automatically pass into his control simply because he was my son. After the call, Thomas kept his laptop open. "There is one more thing." Caleb's company-issued phone was backed up through our managed system. Under company policy, Thomas had preserved only communications related to Northridge, the loan, and the Friday meeting. Derek had written to Caleb the night before, "If he hesitates, push him in front of the family. He always folds when people are watching." Caleb had replied, "That's why they're coming." Rachel had sent another message. "Do not threaten him with the kids until the papers are on the table. He may cancel the meeting." Caleb answered, "I know how to handle him." The messages removed the last possibility that I had mistaken uncontrolled anger for a deliberate strategy. His frustration may have been real, but the audience was selected. The deadline was selected. Even the children had been assigned a role. I thought back to the payroll rescue and the company trucks. Both demands had arrived when people Caleb knew I wanted to protect were close enough to hear. I had remembered those moments as times when he lost control. The messages showed that at least part of the timing had always been a choice. There was no satisfaction in proving it. Caleb said to a salesman who had saved jobs with his first municipal contract. I had watched his confidence become ability, then watched ability become entitlement, because I kept removing the cost of his worst decisions. Do you still want Olivia in the room? Maya asked. Only long enough to correct the financial story Caleb invited her to witness. The moment he uses her as leverage, she leaves. Thomas placed Rachel's message in a sealed board packet. It would not be read in front of managers or bank staff unless her conduct became directly relevant to the company review. Derek's message was different. A broker had encouraged a corporate officer to use family pressure to obtain a guarantee, so the bank and board needed to see it. I slid the compass into the inside pocket of my jacket and closed the evidence folder. Before leaving, I walked through the service department. A technician was replacing a damaged hydraulic line on an excavator due back with a road crew on Monday. 2 employees at the parts counter were deciding whether a rush shipment should travel by air or dedicated truck. They knew nothing about North Ridge. They should not have to become experts in my son's private debt to know whether their jobs would exist next month. At the bank, Caleb and Derek were waiting in the lobby. Rachel stood with Olivia near the windows. Olivia carried a small notebook and wore the uncertain expression of someone who had been told she was attending an important family milestone without being told what she was expected to do. She came to me before Caleb could stop her. Grandpa, Dad said this loan means he gets to lead the company someday. He said if you start doubting him, I should remind you that our family needs you to believe in him. Did you want to attend a loan meeting? I asked. I thought it was an announcement. Dad said everyone had agreed. No one has agreed. Whether I sign a financial document is not your responsibility. Olivia closed the notebook. Then why did he tell me what to say? Caleb had stopped pretending not to watch us. That is a question he should answer when you are not standing in a bank lobby, I said. Rachel approached and placed a hand on Olivia's shoulder. Your grandfather is making this sound more serious than it is? Then the meeting will be brief. Caleb came over with Derek beside him. Can we not start the tension out here? I did not invite your daughter to influence a guarantee. His face hardened. She is here because she is part of the future. She is here because you gave her a line to use if I said no. Derek stepped between us. Let's settle the documents, then the family can discuss the rest privately. The bank's senior credit officer opened the conference room doors. On the table lay the personal guarantee, proposed mortgage documents, a corporate resolution, and the North Ridge loan package. None was signed. My home address appeared on the proposed mortgage papers. The page beside it described my Ward equipment shares as supporting collateral. Caleb had reduced 27 years of work and 60 livelihoods to blank signature lines he expected an audience to make me fill. I felt the compass against the inside of my jacket and took my seat. The 2 board members sat near Thomas and Maya. 3 managers took seats farther down the table. Rachel guided Olivia into a chair across from me. Caleb chose the seat nearest the presentation screen. Derek began before bank counsel finished introductions. We are here to finalize a transformative expansion for the Ward organization, supported by Henry's guarantee and the strength of Ward equipment. The senior credit officer interrupted him. For clarity, no guarantee has been approved or executed. This meeting is an authorization and credit review. Caleb looked at me. What did you tell them? I told them no one had my authority. His voice sharpened. This is still the same deal. We are wasting time on labels. Then one question should clear it up. I looked at Derek. Which company receives the money? He set down the presentation remote. The funds support an integrated warehouse strategy benefiting the broader Ward operation. There is no broader Ward operation. There is Ward equipment supply, and there is North Ridge logistics. Which one receives the money? Derek glanced at Caleb. Northridge is the funding entity. Maya placed the use of funds report on the table. Northridge Logistics receives the money, she said. Ward Equipment does not own it. One of the managers leaned forward. Rachel's hand tightened around Olivia's notebook. Caleb pushed back his chair. Dad, stop embarrassing me and sign the papers. I am not the person raising his voice. He leaned across the table, one palm beside the unsigned guarantee. Sign it now. Do not make me turn this meeting into something uncomfortable. For the first time in his life, I let the discomfort belong entirely to him. I closed the unsigned guarantee and pushed it toward the bank's counsel. No. Caleb kept one palm on the table. You have not heard the full presentation. I have read the full package. That is why I am not signing. Maya placed the Northridge ownership schedule beside the proposed corporate resolution. Ward Equipment owns no part of Northridge Logistics, she said. Caleb owns the controlling interest. The board never approved an acquisition, investment, guarantee, or shared warehouse program. Caleb pointed toward the presentation screen. Northridge was created to support our growth. The ownership is temporary. Thomas looked at the documents. There is no agreement making it temporary. Maya placed the internal transfer summary on the table. Ward Equipment has already paid $214,000 toward Northridge contractors, utilities, consultants, and debt-related costs. The payments were divided across Caleb's approval limit and described as Ward Equipment expenses. There is no repayment agreement and no board authorization. Caleb's face changed. Until that moment, he had not known how much we had found. Those were temporary advances. Every growing company moves money between related operations. One of the directors asked the question he had avoided. Related by whose ownership? Caleb looked at me instead of answering. Maya turned to the use of funds report. Northridge owes approximately $780,000. $690,000 from this loan would repay old debt. Ward Equipment receives almost no equipment or inventory. One of the managers stared at Caleb. You told us this funded a new distribution center. It does, Caleb said. Once the old obligations are cleared, both warehouses become part of our operating network, a network Ward Equipment does not own. Maya replied. Caleb turned toward Olivia. This is what your grandfather thinks of our family. He would rather protect strangers than give your father one chance to build something. Olivia's shoulders pulled inward. Dad, you told me everyone had agreed. We had a deal until he decided to sabotage it. I did not answer Caleb through his daughter. Olivia, this conversation is not your burden. She closed the notebook Caleb had given her. I don't want to be used to make either of you sign anything. You will not be. I asked a senior manager who had known her since childhood to wait with her in the lobby. When the door closed behind them, I addressed the remaining managers. You were invited because this transaction was presented as an approved Ward Equipment expansion. It is not. The company's payroll and operating accounts are protected. The rest is now a board and family matter. They left quietly. I had corrected the corporate story in front of the people Caleb had misled. I did not need them to witness every wound that followed. Thomas opened the message log preserved from Caleb's company-issued phone. He read Derek's words aloud. If he hesitates, push him in front of the family. He always folds when people are watching. Then Caleb's answer. That's why they're coming. Derek stared at the table. Caleb gave a short laugh. That was private talk, a joke about how Dad handles meetings. No, I said. It is how you have been negotiating with me for years. Rachel leaned forward. Caleb was under pressure. We were trying to keep you from canceling before he could explain. Thomas did not read her private message aloud. He placed the sealed copy in front of the independent directors. Your instruction about when to threaten Henry with the children is preserved for the board review, he said. Rachel's face lost its color. I was trying to protect our family. You were helping Caleb choose the moment my fear of losing the grandchildren would be most useful, I said. That is not protection. Her responsibility was now recorded without turning the bank meeting into a public reading of every family message. I told Caleb I had been less than 20 feet away in the warehouse when he called me weak and explained how an audience would force me to sign. If the insult had been the issue, I would have confronted him there. Instead, I asked for records, and the records proved the hidden ownership, the unauthorized transfers, and the private debt. Caleb mistook my refusal to fight him for an inability to stop him. The bank officer collected the personal guarantee and proposed mortgage documents. This loan is suspended pending independent review. No funds will be disbursed, no collateral will be accepted, and Mr. Shaw will no longer act as intermediary on this file. Derek began to object, but bank counsel directed him to preserve his records and respond through his firm. One of the independent directors closed the transfer report. Caleb, you have provided no authorization, service agreement, or repayment schedule. Under the resolutions approved this morning, you are administratively suspended pending investigation. Your authority to move money or commit company assets has been revoked. Caleb turned on me. You're choosing employees over your son. I am refusing to sacrifice 60 families to protect one man from his own decisions. His hand struck the table. You always give in eventually. I reached inside my jacket and placed the compass beside the unsigned guarantee. The needle moved once, then settled. Not this time. Caleb stared at the compass he had seen all his life. A calm man is not a conquered man. Sometimes he is simply giving you one final chance to stop. The bank ended its review. Northridge left without the loan. The board opened a formal investigation, and the $214,000 became a documented repayment claim against Caleb and Northridge. No police entered the room. No one was arrested. The legal issues were the undisclosed conflict, misuse of company funds, misleading loan materials, and breach of duty. Any further referral would depend on the completed audit. Mayor's final report also documented the earlier rescues I had paid personally: the tax bill, the payroll shortage, and the contract settlement. Together with the Northridge transfers, the identifiable support totaled $370,000 before smaller expenses. Every time Caleb shouted, I had paid to end the argument. The final total showed what that piece had cost. It also showed my part in creating the pattern. I had not chosen Caleb's deception, but I had repeatedly removed the consequences that might have stopped it earlier. The money was recoverable. The years I spent teaching my son that pressure worked were not. There was no clean victory after the meeting. Caleb did not call me for almost 3 months. Rachel restricted visits until Olivia insisted her relationship with me was not a bargaining tool. Family dinners stopped, and my house became quieter than I wanted it to be. 8 months later, Northridge had surrendered the mostly empty warehouse and restructured what remained. Caleb sold personal assets and began repaying ward equipment under a written agreement. Derek was under professional review. Rachel and Caleb were living separately, and Olivia had made it clear that her relationship with me would no longer be used as leverage. The independent audit had confirmed the undisclosed transfers and the false business descriptions attached to them. The board converted the full amount into a formal repayment claim, secured against Caleb's remaining Northridge interest and certain personal assets. We chose that route because it offered the clearest recovery for ward equipment, not because a signed repayment agreement restored trust. Trust required conduct over time. Ward equipment remained stable. After independent valuation and legal review, an employee ownership trust acquired a controlling interest. Separate education trusts protected Olivia and her brother. I stepped away from daily operations and stayed on as an advisor. One evening, Caleb came to the warehouse after most of the staff had left. He carried no folder. He brought no deadline and no audience. "I thought you gave in because you knew I was right," he said. "I gave in because I was afraid losing the argument would mean losing my son. And now I know winning every argument was how you were losing yourself." He asked if he could return to ward equipment. I did not say never. I told him the money had to be repaid in full. He had to continue counseling, disclose every outside interest, and prove for at least 1 year that he could work under an independent supervisor without management authority. Most important, he could never again use his children to pressure anyone. "And if I do all of that, then you can apply for a role. You will not inherit control." He nodded slowly. It was not reconciliation, but it was the first conversation we had finished without him raising his voice or me paying to end it. Months later, I stood in the warehouse with a group of young managers beginning a new leadership program. I placed my old compass inside a glass case near the receiving desk. Beneath it were the 4 words my commanding officer had engraved years earlier: "Hold your line calmly." Olivia stood beside me after the others left. "Grandpa, did you ever feel like yelling back? Of course, why didn't you?" "Because if the loudest person decides who is right, no family and no army lasts very long." Caleb had spent years believing my silence meant he had won. He never understood that I was choosing peace, not surrender. The day he placed 60 families behind his debt and expected 1 more argument to make me sign, peace was no longer mine to give him. So I held the line. If your own child had spent years using anger to make you surrender, then finally tried to place your home, company, and employees behind his private debt, would you give him another chance after he repaid the money? Or does someone lose the right to lead the moment he begins confusing intimidation with strength?